Okay, so you're in room A1, and the conversation is going to be about a program that I created called Lakou Zanfan, which is using Vodou as a relational education. So I want to start off in my tradition as a Vodou priestess is to invite the ancestors into the space. And this is ancestral season, the beginning of November. So when we enter a space, we usually say, One, I honor you. And the response is respect. Then let us exchange respect. So I want to tell you, One, and you to respond, respect. So when I say One, say respect. One.
Respect.
One.
Respect.
Okay, so I want to, first introduce you to the legacy that I come from before I begin to engage. So the first woman you see on the screen is my maternal grandmother. And she was born in the Central Plateau of Haiti. And when her mother was struggling with giving birth, and her mother gave birth to 2 boys and a girl, triplets, and thereafter she transitioned. So the family took the boys, and my grandmother was given to the nuns in the community. And in that time in Haiti, there were only European nuns. So there were no Black or Haitian clergy of any sorts. So she grew up with the nuns, and she learned the Catholic prayers, but they never really gave her education instruction. So, but when she came of her own awareness, she decided that she wanted to revere ancestors. So she was an orphan child who decided to revere ancestors. So I grew up with her. I am named after her. She became an activist for women in Haiti, and she was 36 and unmarried. And then she met my grandfather, who he was younger. Grandma was a cougar. He was younger, and he fell in love with her. And he was the youngest in his family and the only one that had access to education out of his siblings. And he would obtain a job with the government, and eventually he would come to the United States, the first to come to the US, and send for his family. So he was the pathway to this migration. And then I introduce you to my paternal grandmother. And she married young. She had 4 sons young, my father being the youngest, and her husband died when she was young. And her only pathway at that time, she had an opportunity to come to the United States. And in 1948, she migrated, leaving my 2-year-old father, and migrated to the US. And she was greeted in the US by the civil rights movement and had to navigate that as a young woman. But she sent for her children, and it was the pathway for many of her family members to come to the United States. So, as we think about my tradition, it is very important that the ancestors are central in that knowledge building. I had the privilege, my grandmother, I promised her that I would get as much education as I could because she didn't. So I have several degrees, and my terminal degree is in education from Harvard University, because she wanted what we call in my tradition a philosophe. And she's still the wisest person I have ever met. And she's crossed the ancestor realm. But just to give you a quick context of Haitian history, there's this ideology that Christopher Columbus landed in America. And the America he landed in 1492 was Haiti. It was the island of Hispaniola. That was American territory. And at the time, we know that there were the Taino and Arawak Native people that were there who greeted and embraced, but didn't know what they would face. And there was a genocide that happened in many ways, like a virus that came very, very close to what we're dealing with. There was a lot of things that happened. By 1514, the European captors started bringing in African slaves, kidnapped Africans to the island of Hispaniola. And then between 1791 to 1804, there was a revolution that happened and they gained their independence. And so these people did not consider themselves slaves. After 300 years, they were liberators. They would be their own liberators. And so it is estimated about 1 million slaves or kidnapped Africans was brought to Haiti itself. And that was twice the number that was in the US. It was considered the most affluent colony during that time. It was the only successful slave revolt documented in history. And it really started a Pan-African movement. These were Africans of different socioeconomic classes, different religious beliefs, different ways of understanding the world, and they had to make meaning. And they created what I call a Haitian epistemology, with one language, one ideology, and that epistemology was Vodou. It wasn't a religion, it was a context of existing with a sovereign spirit and mind of liberation. So, so this began the first Pan-African consciousness, that you had all of these people from different parts of Africa, mixed race people, native people coming together. And, one of the misnomers that happens, well, there was this big voodoo ceremony that happened, and so it's very, this was an assembly. This was something that was thought out for 300 years. This is something that, it lasted 13 years of battle. And so we call this the spirit is the energy that exists within us, that light that exists within us. It is not a religious thing. It's a consciousness and understanding. And they came together in a relational way with differences and created a language and created a system of practice, of understanding. And that took a lot of effort because it was the only one that ever happened in the Americas. And in doing that, the relational ideology continued. Haitians went to South America and helped in countries like Venezuela, Bolivia, and different countries to help them also gain their independence. They trained people to do that. They even went and tried to talk to the US president and said, we will buy back US slaves, colony slaves. So this is the spirit of a people, and understanding that you cannot do anything by yourself. And the Haitian mind is still, they captured the essence of what was positive. There are these fortresses that's all across Haiti, and people are wondering, how did they build these things? This is the citadel, which was considered one of the wonders of the world, but it didn't go in, maybe because it was an African nation of slaves, it was considered. And so what was the mind of these enslaved people that are called primitive, that they could have these structures created with this relational Vodou consciousness? So what is Vodou? It's a relational awareness of how we understand. There's religion involved with syncretism, right? Because the Catholics, now mind you, there were African Christians there, but their Jesus was probably Black. There was Jews, African Jews, there were Muslims, there were all of these people in African indigenous religious systems. So as we think about this conference, what does it mean to have a global relational understanding of awareness? And so they had to hide, because if they were doing their own worship, they could get killed, right? So they used the saints. Some of them used the saints. They used symbols. They began to merge the European ideologies into their understanding of what that meant with their lens that they wore. They partnered with the few natives that were left. And so this started to create, this consciousness of existing, that you can, from many comes one, and that was Vodou. It's a Haitian epistemology. It's a Haitian way of understanding. When I was at Harvard, they kept on saying this word epistemology. I didn't know. I said, my epistemology begins with my grandmother. And they told me I was wrong. I said, absolutely not. I am right. Ancestor worship is my understanding of this world with energy, global universal energy. That's what I was taught. And they told me that was evil. So, and this is for those in the diaspora, this is our legacy. This is our inheritance in how to thrive in this world. It's our culture, it's our identity. And all the research shows that when you have this strong ethnic identity, regardless of where you were, that is a protective factor. So, you know, I started writing about Haitian epistemology, you know, in my dissertation, and then there's a group of folks who were writing as well. And we spoke about, you know, this is one of the scholars, you know, I quote him, he says the Haitian Vodou epistemology centers the way human consciousness and ideas are interpreted by the individual based on the yearning to learn, develop, and build knowledge together, while integrating multiple modalities and the ability to recreate this physical world. We are at a state right now where we have to recreate this physical world. And, you know, all of the images you will see is from my programming. I create summer programming, enrichment programming for children in Haiti and Pan-African children in the United States. Just to talk about the image, you know, this is one image where in Haiti, there's not Black dolls. There's no import. So I worked with an elder in Haiti, Baina Belo, and to collect Black dolls. So we could have a conversation with Black girls and boys and their fathers. We invited the fathers, the men of the community, to come in and have workshops around what is the beauty and contribution of a Black girl, you know, in an emerging nation, because they are the ones that are not sent to school. They're the ones that are marginalized in different ways. So Haitian epistemology is all about relational learning, exchanging knowledge through multiple ways of expression of what is learned through writing, dance, music, interaction with elders, ancestors. And it's a process of understanding self individually, interpersonally, and communally. So this is the foundation of how I run my programs. So, okay, wow, she went to Harvard, that's great, right? But like, it's a responsibility, you know, and I had to unlearn things while at school. And, you know, I was graced that I would have writer's block and these colorful images would come up and I would draw images to understand what was going on in my psyche in this contradictory world. You know, I had parents who never finished high school, a grandmother who couldn't read or write, and then I ended up in this space at 25 years old, the youngest in my class. So I had to merge Haitian epistemology and academia for my own intellectual freedom, for my liberation. I still had to be intact and understand that, yes, I'm citing all these European people of descent. Why am I not citing Haitians? Why am I not citing my grandmother? Why is the organic intellectual not considered? So I spent some time, supposed to graduate in 5, graduated in 7 years. And, you know, my dissertation was called Across Waters, Haitian Students Search for Identity, Lot Bordeaux. And so I followed a group of 30 Haitian kids who had just arrived to the city to see how they navigated social and academic space. And what happened is no one spoke to them about being a migrant. No one spoke to them, you know, you were Haitian, now you're Black. So there was these shifts in cultural understandings. Many of them were middle class in their country, and then they came back to a lower class. So they created their own curriculum. They created how to support each other. And it became a issue because out of the 30, only 5 make it to university right after the 12th grade. And so after that process, you know, I spent 18 years when I entered in studying what this Haitian Vodou was, because it was so vilified, which started in the first occupation of Haiti in 1915, where Haiti had retained a lot of its African ideology. And so an attack was made. Hollywood made attack on Vodou. It is still today vilified, right? All indigenous African religions are vilified. I can go get my nails done and in my town, we have a little shrine and altar. But if it is African and if it is spiritual, it is vilified. So I initiated as a priestess. After this 18-year of study, I initiated as a priestess, and I call myself an academic priestess healer. And I'm a school psychologist by training. So if not me, who would merge the psychology and mental, spiritual wellness and education? And I started the Lakou Zanfan Literacy Project. And, just the ideology of education is different, because there's terminologies and other languages, this is a global space, that you really cannot translate clearly. So the whole idea of what is education, what is education? In the US system, education is like consumption of knowledge, consumption of knowing from a particular type of people created for a particular kind of system. And, when I first came to this country, I was put in remedial classes. I went to Harvard, I don't know what happened. So it was like, I wasn't seen. I was seen as a stereotype. I didn't have the language, so I could not reproduce the educational structure that I was supposed to reproduce. Yet I was reproducing the education that I was given, where you're not supposed to look at adults in your eyes. You don't speak unless you are called upon. I was going through, and there was a clash. And what US called education, in Haiti, we call that instruction. But education is the education you receive in the home, in the community, in the school, in the church or Lakou, and the interrelational process of the learning that happens among these communities. So your school teacher can discipline you. We don't believe in corporal punishment, but when they did have that, your school teacher can discipline you. The granny in the community can call you over. And education is, how do I become a person? How do I become human? How do I become whole? And I cannot do this without having the understanding of the communities in which I live. And that is education. I know how to act at home. I know how to act at school. I know how to respect elders and young people in all of these settings. So the whole idea of education is different. So the mission of the Lakou Zanfan Literacy Project is to cultivate and empower Haitian youth to make positive life choices, develop social, cultural awareness, and to build literacy skills that will enable them to maximize their personal, interpersonal, and communal potential towards liberation. And this is my contribution, is to highlight love, liberation, and legacy. That is my responsibility, as a marginalized community in the Americas. And remember, the impetus in the creation of this Vodou ideology was through the process that everyone should be free. So the program has an academic program, literacy. I did this program in the US and in Haiti, and literacy is fundamental, in terms of reading and writing, that's part of it. Now I'm creating books around this, which is challenging. Culture, what is culture? What is your national culture? What is your universal culture? What is your global culture? How do you fit in the cosmology that was created by the divine? Wellness, mental wellness, spiritual wellness, physical wellness. They all have to engage with that. Psychosocial development, time, place, and location. How do I know myself depending on a time, place, and location that I am? How do I see myself, and how do others see me, and how can I not be in conflict with that? How do I exist in contradiction? And then there's also a spiritual component. And the spiritual component is understanding that within you, there is a higher being. There's an aspiration for you to constantly be greater than what you are, and you don't even know the magnitude of what you could become. And then there's always an intergenerational piece, which includes ancestry. There's always an intergenerational piece amongst the faculty, staff. Like we have high school students being mentors to the younger students. We have elders coming in. We have in Haiti, farmers coming in. We have, you know, we even had babies coming in. We had like, they wouldn't leave. So we had to do something with the 3 and 4-year-olds. You know, so this was based towards, you know, middle school. So we let them come and let them teach us as well. So this whole, I want to talk about what does Lakou mean. Lakou is usually the spiritual space that exists within Vodou. But the Haitian Lakou is a ceremonial space. And it also serves as relational space that ensures intergenerational participation and ownership in all communal affairs. So we have to have a joint ownership of the planet that we exist in, right? So we talk to them, and that is embedded in the practice. And all of these images, as I said, are taken from the program. This is the program, first year of the program that I did in Florida that lasted 7 years. And so, as we said, so we wanted to take that term Lakou, the ceremonial learning space of children. That's what Lakou Zanfan means, the youth relational spiritual space. And so Lakou Zanfan utilizes an intergenerational collaboration to create the curriculum, which includes the camp youth, the participants, the youth mentors, college students, elders, spiritual teachers, academics, community leaders, psychologists, healers, that is dialogic and grounded in collaborative spaces, learning, including talking about spirit, ceremonial spaces, learning spaces, community spaces, family spaces. We want them to decolonize the ideology of what is your space, because it's all our space. And because Haiti has other issues, we also include this agricultural space as yours to claim as well. And so this is an image. I was voted on this board by the governor, and I had a conversation with the youth. So I had them sit, I told everybody get down, let the young people sit, you know, in the board, on the board chairs. We have to begin, if you are a teacher, you have to, your job is to teach students how to be teachers, their own teacher, right? And if you cannot shift that power dynamic, the student must be your teacher as well as you are the student's learner. We have to begin to rethink and shift these power dynamics. And over the years, I've been doing this for, you know, in and on for almost 20 years. And what we have found, which I think is not new, but there's also relational modalities that the marginalized students understand better to learn something, right? And we call it Lakou relational modalities. Like when you are teaching something, you have to have all of these aspects. This is indigenous. This is how we understand things. It has to be, you have to have a visual component, an audio component, oral where they have to speak, written, there has to be a reflective component, and sharing. And this is what makes it relational. You know, it's like I'm a college professor, and sometimes, you know, it's like you got to work in groups. I don't want to work with groups. Yes, you're going to work in groups. Like we don't know how to learn together, how to have disagreement or converging thoughts without having conflict. And we wonder why. Have we been taught about relational understanding? So just to give you an idea of how this would look like in the process, you know, this is an example where every year we have a theme and a slogan. So this particular year, it was mystical imagination, the mystery of learning. What is the mystery of you knowing, of you building knowledge? And we had no curriculum, zero curriculum. And from nothing comes everything. You know, there's a nothingness that we have to tap into. And the kids had to create things with their teachers. They had to present, they had to do all these things so that they can see there's no mystery. You are the mystery. So we created opening rituals and closing rituals. And the rules and norms were not called the rules and norms. They were called ways of creating love. So this was a poster that was in each of the classrooms for the US system. And the opening ritual, I invest in myself because I invest in who I am. I invest in myself because I must invest in my fellow man or woman. I invest in myself because I am an intricate part of life. Without me, my dreams cannot take flight. We wanted to decolonize their imagination, to talk about dreams, to create fantasies for themselves and stories. Everything, art was included in every dynamic because art gives you a connection to the nothing, right? And a teacher came and created these rituals for us. The closing ritual, and they did these every morning and every afternoon. Every morning was a full assembly together. I eat from the hands of the past. I drink from the lessons of today with every day. My dreams can be brought to life and take flight. And they had to memorize this, and we would pick on students at any point in time to recite, and they would volunteer eagerly. So I had for the Florida program, I had 100 students every year for 7 years. So we watched the growth. And we didn't call them rules or ways to create love. This was example. Focus our eyes and not our hands on each other. Don't hit each other. No, we're gonna focus our eyes and our hands on each other. Giving means getting. So they had to be, generosity was an element. Each one teach one, everyone was a teacher. And then we gave opportunities for students to add their own ways of creating love. And let me go back. So one of the facets of this Vodou epistemology was to use the lois. In some traditions, it's the rishas, the gods and goddesses. So instead of using these as religious aspects, we use them as principle, because every orisha, every loi represents something. And you know, when I went to a school called Boston Latin School, an exam school in Massachusetts, and I took 7th to 12th grade, I took 5 years of Latin and 2 years of ancient Greek. And that is where I learned fundamentally that there was an African philosophy that existed. And the Romans and Greeks borrowed that. They went to the mystery schools in Africa. And it was Homer, Pythagoras, Hippocrates. All these people went to Africa to study for a minimum of 7 to 21 years. And so again, this is the ideology of how do we bring the indigenous forward? Some will say that the European are the youngest. So how can the youngest be the ones that bring forth history without the integration of all of the civilizations that came before? History can be created by the youngest. You know, so it's like we have to have this integrated format. And then we would beg to differ that the ancestors are the first lois, the first ones. They're the first gods and goddesses, because we know that there was one immersion of a nothingness that created a something. We're gonna all agree on that. There was nothing and then there was something. So those somethings must have had knowledge, and then it went generationally down the line. So the ancestors are the first principles that we know, that from nothing came something, and they always exist, their energy. Then we go to the Haitian gods and goddesses mythology, whatever you want to call them. But I call these universal energies first. These are universal energies, right? In terms of the energy of love, the energy of healing, the energy of knowledge. And then we had to give them names so they were accessible. I am a school psychologist. These are also Haitian archetypes. So you begin to know personality traits of an individual that mirror these universal energies. How beautiful is that? Today I'm the energy of love. Tomorrow I'm the energy of chaos. And I know that in my being, and there's a name for that. I know what it looks like. I know the colors associated with it. And these are cultural laws. So imagine kidnapped Africans were on this plantation trying to figure out how to make meaning of this strange new existence. And they had to use their mythology and hide this synchronism. And these are Haitian principles of living. And of course that had to be vilified. So these are images of what we call the energy of love, Isis. You know, in every tradition there's one. This is Ezili Donto. She accepts all her children, queer, not queer, disabled, abled. She accepts all of her children, right? And she was represented by a symbol. So then they had to take the Madonna, the Black Madonna, and embrace it. And this is an image of me depicting her as the healer teacher. And I will tell you a little quick story about this. Someone help me with the time. I think I have some time. And then so she, during the Haitian Revolution, other Europeans came to help fight. And the Polish army saw these Black women fighting. And they stopped and they said, we cannot fight because we have a sacred mother and she is a Black Madonna. So the Polish Black Madonna is who we use as our example of mother love. And these Polish people could not go back. Their men could not go back. They deserted their armies. So Desir, the president at the time, said, you are not, he didn't say you're Haitian. He said, now you are Black. And they settled in Haiti. And there's 2 regions where these Polish soldiers resided. So talk about the integration of what we could learn. So these are just some examples of the lois. So these were the symbols. They weren't people's faces or pictures. We had to do that to hide it so they wouldn't kill us. So, you know, and so these were the symbols that was used to represent the different orishas and lois, and they were put on cornmeal and they honored that. So Gere, which is the season we're in now, is the conceptualization of life and death. And is a process, and death is a daily rebirth. You got the opportunity to die and live every day. And how will you walk with that transformative energy? You know, and I talked about Ezili and Malasa are the twin energies. And they remind us of the duality and the multiplicity that exists within us as individuals. How do we deal with the conflict that we have within us and come to resolution? We use these principles, each one every week, and have activities surrounding them. And Zaka is growth, is the planter. How do you grow? How do you create your own seed? And so, you know, this is, I know it's very small, you can't see it, but this was an example of how we laid it out, right? So they would the first 2 weeks would be learning about self. The second 2 weeks would be interpersonal activities. The last weeks would be community activities. And we would have a display of everything they learned, and it would be guided by the readings. Like, for example, with the Gede, we started with the history, the indigenous European and African merger of identity and what that created. And we wanted them, like, how did you get your name? How were you created? And we had spoken word where they would write poems and spoken words around your awareness, your 5 sense awareness. So everything, so that was just an example of how we integrated. When we were talking about, we had them create clay masks around their faces, and one had to do the other student, and they would draw what they felt on the inside and draw what they felt on the outside. So these were the type of very purposeful activities we did to mirror the Haitian principles. And I want to talk about the spirituals. Every spirit also has a song. And I want to play this for you. So this is a young boy. He must have been 7, and he was the teacher for the day. So we were learning about the Ogu principle of warrior. How do you be a social justice warrior? How do you be a warrior to protect yourself and your community? And remember, these were so-called slaves, kidnapped Africans, but they had the Haitian mind and spirit and used a context. So they had to communicate from generation to generation. The slave life might be 10 years. So they had to communicate certain principles to abide by. So this song says, you know, warrior spirit. We have to understand that some of us can use our mouth to eat anything, but we can't say anything. We can't say everything. And to understand when and how and where to speak. So we're teaching these kids about the respect of when do you talk. And this is in the spiritual that says it. And so this was the, you know, he was the teacher. So he taught the students this song and they had to repeat. And you can see there's all age, there's teenagers. And then so at the end, he didn't like that they weren't more aggressive in the song. So the last thing he says, are y'all hungry? Because I'm not hearing you. So, you know, beautiful teacher for the day. So this is how we do this relational kind of understanding. And I just want to give you another example around a project we did. You know, right now, this last summer, I was in Haiti doing the summer program, and we wanted to instill farming. You know, Zaka, that the symbol at the bottom is the symbol for Zaka, the planter. We call them veves. So, and they're not feminine or masculine, but they're feminine and masculine. Like, so there's an energy of polarity that we want to convey. So Zaka is growth. You know, how do we see growth? And so the guerrilla gardening is you know, cultivating plants. This was something that was indigenous that was happening where the Maroons in Haiti used to do this guerrilla gardening because they had to, you know, plant and to find the food. These are things that we do in urban areas where there are food deserts and that sort of thing. So we explained to them this whole idea of the power of planting. And what does that mean to be able to see a seedling grow? You know, so the students literally had, we created these little balls with clay and dirt, and it's a whole process. And then you put seeds inside of it. And then the Maroons would throw them in random places and would follow them and watch them. So we had these students create these little balls of clay. I think you can see it in this far end. And then we told them to think about the energy of Zaka, to think about the laws of Zaka, to think about how this seed grows within you and how it's your responsibility. And they had to meditate on the ball that they made and pick a place in the community that they felt needed it and would throw it and would watch over it. And if it was their household that needed that, they would put it around their house. So to give them complete understanding of how we use these principles. So yeah, so this is the Lakou Zanfan Camp. So again, like, you know, one of the ways that we understood the constellation of the Pan-Africans is we divided it into 21 nations. So the 21 nations has its own rhythm, its own understanding. And we were teaching them about the 21 nations that make up the Pan-African constellation. And the Igbo is one of them. And so we were teaching them the Igbo song and how their ancestors spoke and sang. So we were trying to get them to understand the greater awareness of who they are. So I want us to have a little bit of time to speak, and thank you so much for your attention. In my tradition, when we say thank you, peace, amen, ashe, we say ayibobo. So let me stop the share. Okay, so I want to invite any reactions, any support, any critiques and thinking with me. This is a project that, you know, is ongoing. I'm now trying to work on a curriculum. I'm not a curricularist, but like, you know, because we also let this emerge over the last 12 years. So there wasn't one distinct curriculum. We had teachers coming in and adapting. Like one year we decided we had to have community leaders come in. So every Friday was community day. So we had a pastor come in, voodoo priest come in, an acupuncturist come in. You know, we had all of these different people come in. We had purposeful service field trips where they had to go to the food pantry. So it's still in evolution, but I am charged with creating a curriculum and an understanding of how to make this relevant. But I would appreciate any reaction, advice, feedback.
My first reaction, you know, I think I've learned a lot of things that I wasn't aware of before, and I think that it was my curiosity that called me to this workshop, and I've been kind of surprised with the many resonances as I was hearing you talking. Many things that you were associating with Haitian culture and voodoo, I could make connections with in terms of my own upbringing and culture, and I was kind of surprised by it. You know, I suppose it's part of why we are presented always as so different. You know, so, but it's like, why am I surprised? You know, because we are all subject to those colonizing principles, isn't it? Thank you very much, Aibubu. A new word I've learned as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, Charlene, if I can take just 2 minutes of your time, it's, you know, I mean, I was particularly interested, you know, there are many other sessions which were actually also very interesting, but I was particularly interested in yours because this question of, you know, cultural, you know, indigenous cultural educational perspectives, it's not every day that we get to hear of, you know, how they really, you know, what are the experiments going on with that, and, you know, and how are they really expressed, you know, how are they designed, and so on. So I was really, so thanks a lot. It was very, very enlightening, and it's also, I mean, I assume I will be having this recording for some time on this, and that I'll be able to share it with some of my other friends who are also interested in this, because you know, I did work on, I mean, this whole idea of diversity, reviving cultural diversity, and therefore, you know, for the planet, basically, you know, it's very much part of all the international conventions. And so there are different kinds of experiments. And my complaint in this area has always been that whenever you talk of reviving indigenous or any other cultural perspective other than the modern culture which comes through mainstream education, other than that, any other cultural perspective, reviving it, you know, the experiments most often they really boil down to integrating, you know, a cultural perspective, a local cultural perspective into mainstream schools, you know. So you would get, for example, a practitioner, voodoo practitioner into schools and introduce, and, you know, and somehow, you know, the schooling system seems to be showing that, well, this is also a very valuable resource in our communities or something like that, or they would be training teachers to understand local traditions, local cultures, and bring that into their classrooms, And so there is always this concept of, this whole idea of bringing other cultures, integrating it into mainstream school. And I obviously have a problem with that, because, it just means as though you have to, it's like, bringing, in order to revive cultural diversity, you are bringing in, you want to, you're using the lens of the culture that has actually destroyed or is damaging all these cultures in order to make them. And so why do you have to look at it through this lens, and why not, so I have, been campaigning regularly for, I've been campaigning very quite strongly, for my point has been that, if these cultural perspectives still exist in in the world today, it's because they have not been part of mainstream education, because they have stayed away. That's why they still exist. Otherwise they wouldn't be existing, because we'd have the same language, we'd have the same concepts to describe what they are doing, and the same, So my question to you is, there are 3 or 4 different points I just noted down. You said that literacy is part of your, your program. Which language? I mean, what do you mean by literacy exactly? Which language are you using?
Yes, so for the program in the US, we actually had the kids learn Creole, because some of them had the oral and we had the written. So in the US, it's primarily in English, but we also integrated Creole. In Haiti, it's all in Creole. And so, but what I did, I'm trying to create relevant material. So I had a book that I created to use this summer. So it was a story of identity awareness. And so it was in Creole, but we had English as well on the same page. So we're not, so it's all Creole. I mean, the school is usually in French, but students in certain areas can't access that. So in Haiti, it's all Creole, and we give them the English print because some of them are curious.
And the other question I had was that, you said it's about 100 students for 7 years you've been, and I'm assuming that it's, since you talk of it as a summer camp, that's a few weeks, it takes place over a few weeks. For the rest of the year, what happens? These students, they go back to mainstream schooling. How does that happen?
Yes, I mean, for the US program, we did have it for 7 years, and we got some funding, and we had about 100 kids every summer. And so again, this was over time. We started to have enrichment programs during the school year. So again, making science culturally relevant. So it was on a college campus that they would come. So we had volunteers come and do that. And then we had these kind of ambassador students that were the older students, and they were in the same community as the schools. In Haiti, we're still working on it, because I've been doing the work in Haiti periodically in the last 10 years. So the last 3 years I have focused on this one town with these one group of kids. I know the community. So we're still working. I mean, it's, people fund Christian things. They don't really fund Vodou PanAfrican stuff. So I think one of my challenges is that, we got a funder in the US to say, oh, it's okay to only do it with Haitian kids. But in Haiti, I mean, it's just a little problematic. I don't know. I'm hoping that I can get some ideas from this community, because I would love to continue to have enrichment, because it's known in Haiti, and I think in other emerging nations, that you have lessons, they have lessons, throughout the whole year, they have tutoring, they have enrichment. So I'm hoping to train a cadre of folks and have someone, because I have a site now in Haiti. So, but it's all an issue of funding, but I would love to continue enrichment. And we're having some of the poor kids where I'm getting volunteers to help pay for their school at the minimum, because there's also fragmented school, but the enrichment is as important as the school too. So it's an issue of me.
Yeah, no, my question was more on does one, articulate, basically the interculturality that automatically emerges out of this into inverted commas, a system you're providing where, they're going to a summer camp where they are completely immersed in the Vodou cultural perspective on education and life and learning and living in general, and going to a mainstream school where, they have completely a different view, a different perspective. Yeah. So
yeah, because it was, I'm a research professor as well, but because the summer program was 7 years, we took data and, we wrote articles and we wrote different chapters, my academic partner, and what came back was the parents. They were like, whatever you fundamentally integrated in them, schools grades went up, behavior went up. So the parents, who maybe some were very Christian, they didn't question us because they saw the outcome. So it was an embodied outcome. And then, there were kids who didn't want to leave. So we had to make the older kids mentors for the younger kids. So, we didn't document it, but we took a monitor of their grades and how it was sustained. So the fundamental aspect of the program was embodied. And there was also a psychological aspect where all the kids had group therapy as well. So they got to work on certain things. So that's the only way I can respond to it. And the funders were amazed because they usually don't let you do segregated programs here. So they just kept on giving us money every year because they saw the academic, response that our kids just kept on, grades kept on. Kids who never thought they would ever go to college were getting scholarships. So we do have some documentation of the embodiedness from the program.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we have 5 minutes left. I don't know any other comments. I hope I answered your question, but we have some other comments.
Hi, Charlene. The first word that comes to mind is ayudable, like Carmen said. But also how refreshing. I think that's what invited me to your space today. And it was very refreshing to hear you. And a few things I was thinking about was Paulo Freire's look on education came to mind, and I could I work in an NGO I'm a volunteer for vulnerable groups here in Argentina, Buenos Aires, and we use a little bit of Paulo Freire's and Adalberto Barreto, who is a community therapist. And I love the connection between the importance of, I'm looking for the word, I'm sorry, the importance of preserving our ancestral voices. And that is something that especially when we work with vulnerable groups, the idea that we need to shift the power dynamics, that we need to empower these voices, that we need to as a community, not we need to empower them. You know what? I don't know if I'm being able to express myself correctly. So listening to you and the work you are doing, I think I need like another 60 minutes to hear more because I want more.
Yeah, so yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Yeah, because like one thing I want to share, one of our students, he wanted to be an artist, and his Haitian parents were like, no, you're not going to go anywhere with an art. And then a couple years later, he was in the newspaper and he had the opportunity to show his artwork at the White House when Obama was president. And he wrote in this article, like, I was in this program and they said that art was a fundamental way to express what I know, so it's like we have these stories. So I know we're coming back, but
Yeah, so, I mean, yeah.
thank
Can I
you
just
so much for
say,
coming.
just share a small little thing, because I understand, I completely relate to you. In the beginning of your intervention, you were explaining how, your, Vodou epistemology is not even acceptable, and, and things like that, and I faced a similar problem when on several occasions, but one is significant because, I wrote, I designed a training program for the ministry over here, as part of the program, one reference I made was to a book, just simply a book, whose title is Why Buddhism is True. Now, this book has been written by a professor from Princeton, and the reason I refer to this book is that he gives a very good explanation on, how science has progressed to understand human mind and body. And so the title of the book is that. I can't, and I was not allowed to use that as a reference.
I will.
Can you imagine? It's written by, and yet, it's written by a Western writer, but just the title wasn't acceptable.
It's, this summer I was there when the Haitian president was assassinated, and that morning we did chanting, Om. We did all of these chanting outside of the Vodou tradition. And when I came back, they were calling me, parents were like, this child is still doing the chants every morning. So there's this
your concurrent session A. I hope you had a wonderful